now.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. Welcome back. History Buffs episode 3. After a brief hiatus, some scheduling issues last week, we're going to drop 2 this week. I think it's the plan. Producer RA, right?
Yep. We're going to do, hopefully tonight, I'll email this over to Justin. We're going to film one right after this one and then drop it on Thursday.
Great. So we got 2 dropping this week. The first one we'll get into, I think you said titled it Robert Barons.
Robert Barons, yes.
Robert Barons. It'll be big into monopolies, Andrew Carnegie, John Rockefeller, the Vanderbilts. I guess we can talk about if we can even consider those monopolies. And we can also, obviously draw some connections with that to today. So as always, we got R.A. Minahan. Welcome back. Austin from New London and Ned Snark in a different location, in a historic location.
Yep. I'm up in Maine on vacation.
Vacationing in Maine.
Very nice.
So, all right. I guess we'll start with a kind of a brief setup of the era we're talking about. We're focusing on the late 1800s. You can kind of see a blend into the early 1900s, but that's where you get Teddy Roosevelt and the trust busters, and you see the monopolies kind of start to disappear a little bit. So really focused on the later third, the last third of the 1800s. So you have a period right after the Civil War, a couple decades after the Civil War, Reconstruction's wrapping up. It's a period of kind of government's kind of rolling back their hand in society, because they've basically been trying to rebuild the South for 15, 20 years at this point after the Civil War. And you have government kind of taking a hands-off, laissez-faire approach with things like the economy, really society in general, and it allows for a few specific people to get really wealthy. It allows for businesses in general to flourish, but it's also not a great transitional kind of period for everyday Americans, for the people that are working in Carnegie's, factories, or working, on the Vanderbilt's railroads. Those sort of people. It really isn't the best socially, and really not the best economically either. So this Gilded Age, this period in the late 1800s, is going to lead us directly into the Progressive Era with Teddy Roosevelt, and that's where you get the trust busting in the early 1900s as well. So with that, I guess we'll talk about a few specifics. You have John Rockefeller with Standard Oil, had a monopoly on oil. Andrew Carnegie, however Austin, you went to school up there for a bit. How do you pronounce it?
If you ask anybody from Pittsburgh, it's Carnegie.
Excuse me, Andrew Carnegie. And I guess we'll go with the Vanderbilt family as a whole, but specifically Cornelius Vanderbilt, I think, was the father. Then he kind of passed it off to his sons, and kind of gets into some family issues there. But you have him with the railroads, and I think I forgot to mention Carnegie Steel as well. So a few different monopolies, a few different types of monopolies. I guess my first question is: were monopolies as a whole a necessary evil in this time? Or there something that could have been avoided for the betterment of society, or was kind of what came after with the Progressive Era? Was that, just kind of a result of a laissez-faire, hands-off government approach during the Gilded Age, during the time that allowed monopolies to flourish? Ned, looks like you have something right off the bat.
That's a really good question, because you're coming out of the Civil War, right? So half the country is devastated. The other half is like a monumental loss of life, or returning veterans, with missing limbs, trying to adjust back to this new world that has moved on while they were fighting a war. I mean, it's this very famous stories. Theodore Roosevelt Sr., John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, all had bought someone else to serve in the Civil War for them. So business as usual in the North, right? But you also had a mass influx of immigrants, Irish immigrants specifically. You had the draft. I think am I wrong? Is it the first draft ever? I think it might have been the first draft was for the Union.
Yep.
The South, of course, had volunteers. So you had pretty devastating circumstances happening to like the average American, the workforce, the working man, whether he was a farmer or in the city working in a factory or a steel mill in Carnegie's case. So, but I think they needed some sort of structure, and the government was very hands off back then too. There's a lot of cronyism and favoritism, and you weren't getting the best people in government, even though Ulysses Grant was a great general. He's ranked as one of the worst presidents we've ever had, simply because it was his administration was so corrupt. You also had big, Tammany Hall. So you had a lot of things going on at once, and men like Rockefeller, Morgan, Carnegie, the Vanderbilts, they took advantage of it. And Rockefeller's like one of my favorites, because if we're going to have a discussion whether, good guy or bad guy, I have to go good guy. Like 90%. He was just a ruthless businessman, but he made order out of chaos, because the oil industry in Western Pennsylvania, specifically in like the 1850s, when he first got involved, was just like the Wild West. People would like drilling everywhere, anywhere they could, and the oil was there too. That's what was the amazing thing. But it was done so inefficiently, so wastefully, and that just went against his Protestant training as to how business is supposed to be run, and he just made it very efficient and ended up monopolizing it. So in that case, yes, because also in his case, Standard Oil's monopoly meant lower prices for home heating oil and natural gas and lighting. Still dangerous, right? Because it's gas lights. That's later on. Edison had, he made the big deal about electric lights are safer than gas. But before that, in like 1880 and before, it was gaslight, and he brought that to every American home.
The petroleum was a runoff. It was like a heat runoff at the time.
Correct.
From the gas lights.
Yeah.
But do you think you were talking about him being a good person? Like you mentioned that he was like a ruthless, all of them were ruthless businessmen. But I know a lot of them were like very, very charitable in life. Like later on in life, like after Carnegie got bought out by like J.P. Morgan, he amassed like $300 and something million, like an untold amount, and gave away like 90% of it. Do you think that the reason why they were so giving after they had got all their money is to make up for how they made their money?
Are you asking me?
I'm asking anyone.
Anyone want to handle that?
Austin, what do you think?
I'll start with Ned. Ned, you seem to.
Oh my God.
Well, Rockefeller, his father was a real shady character. He was also a bigamist. So he grew up with his mother and his brothers as the oldest son. So she was a strict, I want to say, Anabaptist, or very fundamental Baptist.
Baptists, yeah, they were Baptist.
She instilled in him a lot of the rules that he kept throughout his life, and one of them was he self-tithed. So for every time when he was working in a law firm, I think it was first in a law firm, then as a clerk somewhere, he donated 10% of his salary back to the church. So it was natural born in him almost. So
wasn't that like his first job too? Wasn't he was like 15 or 16 or something? He was like
his first job was bookkeeper.
Correct.
I can't remember what for, but he's a bookkeeper, like all the businesses, like the business tactics, and he jumped off from there.
Yeah, but if you want to, if we're going to measure on the from like the superficial side, we'll just say, okay, yes, he was very charitable from the beginning. He was only married once to one woman, unlike Morgan. He raised solid children. None of his children were drunks or deviants, and they all did very well on their own. Some of them did better than the others. He never swore. To his direct staff, those people that worked for him, he was a fantastic boss, very collaborative. Even when he was in his mid-30s, when he was kind of pulling himself away from the business, he would lay on a couch in his office while his directors were conducting the affairs. And then when they came to a decision, he'd be laying there with his eyes closed, and they just ask him, "Mr. Rockefeller, what do you think of this decision?" And he's like, he would, yay or nay it, but he would let them make the decision. So he's kind of revolutionary in that regard. So there's never been any scandal about him. And that book, Titan, and I forgot who wrote it. All right, who wrote Titan? It's a great book.
So I don't know if it's on.
Yeah, neither do I, but I have it at home. It's a great book, great biography. He never.
Ron Chernow.
Ron Chernow, right? Great writer. He's written some other stuff too. But he never did anything like that we would consider today scandalous at all, including swearing. He didn't even curse.
Well, that's just because that's his Baptist upbringing.
Correct.
He gave throughout his entire life.
Right.
As far as the Carnegie just kind of gave all at the end. But Yeah, I tend to think Rockefeller was a good person. I don't know about Carnegie, just because I kind of think he was guilted into it. But I mean, Rockefeller, if you look at his history, even supported some like African American causes.
Yes,
Like that.
that's
So,
right. That's right.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was a Baptist or Baptist. It was like a church. I forget if it was a school or if it was like a training for actual Baptist priests, or I'm not entirely sure what
I think
the
it was
term
it
is,
was
but
like a seminary.
Was it
yeah,
Yeah.
A
seminary,
seminary
right.
that turned into a college that
right?
Eventually turned to a college.
Yeah.
It was for primarily African American women.
Women,
This is in
correct.
the, like 1880s. I mean, he
Yep.
was progressive before the progressive era, and even the progressive era wasn't focusing on issues like that. Like these are almost social issues you hear about today. Like I remember like Trump over the last couple of years has helped like ensure funding for prominently African American colleges around the country,
Mhm.
and that's an issue that you don't hear too much about today. But it would be unheard of thinking about 120, 140 years ago.
The Rockefeller Foundation was the first and the largest at its time organized charitable foundation. If I recall correctly from the book, people would stop him on the street and ask him for a handout, and he would give it. But he also didn't carry around a lot of cash. Yeah, but he never really carried it. Like most wealthy people, they had someone else is carrying the cash, right?
Yeah.
So he actually said this is getting too much, and he was already a multimillionaire. He wasn't a billionaire yet, right? This is before Standard Oil was broken up. But like in the 1890s, he actually brought in someone whose name I forgot, but a retired executive director at Standard Oil, and said, I want you to set up a structure for systematic charitable giving. And all of this came about from that. The Rockefeller Foundation today is from that organization. So he was the first one. I think Carnegie, was the second. And then Morgan was also involved in the Vanderbilts as well. But as to being good people, JP Morgan was not a good guy. He dumped his wife was ill. He stayed with her, but he ended up having an affair and later marrying her nurse. I mean, and that was a falling out with Rockefeller because Rockefeller thought that was a no-no. That was, then he divorced her, I believe. I don't know if he remarried after that, but he also would host lavish parties. Rockefeller never drank, was not a drinker. So they were not like, the wild socialites that the Morgans were or the Carnegies or the Vanderbilts. But they were part of the Gilded Age, of course.
Also, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it depends on what your definition of a good person is. Like they could all be these great philanthropists, but if you're looking at just them as a business person, they all use ruthless business tactics to build their monopolies and cheat other people out of money to keep them down so they could eventually buy their companies to, make their monopolies larger. So, I think it really depends on your perspective. I think from a business standpoint, I don't think you can argue that they're not good people. But if you think that their philanthropy outweighs that, then I think you could argue that they're good people.
Actually, Austin, that's a good point too, because regardless of their personal life, the business tactics that they use, the ruthlessness that they use, did put working class people out of work.
Yeah, were their business tactics morally right or justified?
That's a good question.
I think that's like the core issue here, and I think probably not. I would say no. They hurt millions of people in the process of building their massive amounts of wealth, and I don't think their philanthropy. They probably couldn't help that they hurt.
Maybe what I was saying earlier about I think they gave
sure.
What I was saying that I think that like Carnegie at least gave because he felt bad about how he amassed his fortune, whereas Rockefeller, like Ned's talked about, was generally just a pretty good guy. But Carnegie was pretty ruthless, came up from nothing from Scotland, but I think he felt bad. That's why he gave away 90% of his wealth in the end.
Yeah, he was the rags to riches story in the United States. A Scottish immigrant as a boy. Mm-hmm. But Austin, that's also a good point. But when you think about it, can you also measure it then that J.P. Morgan twice bailed out the stock market and the U.S. government twice during panics. The Panic of 1873, which was caused by Jay Gould and was it a rush on silver, and then in I think there was another one in 1903, in which Theodore Roosevelt was advised. I love Theodore Roosevelt was my favorite president, but he was financially not the smartest guy. He was not the most adroit, and he was advised by his counselors to talk to Morgan about helping out lending or propping up the market so it wouldn't crash and cause a huge problem in 1903.
Wasn't that messed up?
Yeah,
one person can bail out the United States government.
Exactly, twice.
That just shouldn't happen.
No,
that just
Was it Rockefeller at the height of his wealth? His entire net worth was 10% of the United States GDP.
Yes,
like that's insane.
That's crazy.
In today's standards, I think he'd be worth $450 billion. Like that was at the height of his wealth. Like,
right. And we'll get into it a little bit later.
I'm not
too,
sure anybody should be that wealthy. I mean, which makes me sound like a social.
No, it's just I agree with you. I don't think you should be that. I mean, I just don't think someone.
And that could be
for a reason to make sure that no one is abusing the system, and clearly he was able to abuse the system in a way to benefit himself.
KDL, what were you going to say?
And that could be an argument for, maybe not. So we'll get into like the big tech, the modern day, if you want to call monopolies today,
Sure.
Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Google, obviously. But you look at like a Mark Zuckerberg, compare the wealth like to today's standards. He's really nowhere near Rockefeller back in the day. So that could be an argument for they're not too like. If you think they're big now, imagine what they would be if they were Rockefeller standards.
Yeah, $418 billion. But still, I think with like today's tech. So the comp I was drawing with Rockefeller was Bill Gates. Bill Gates is like, he has like in the early 90s, he was called before Congress a bunch of times for his anti-competitive business tactics. But he's got the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that's eradicating like illnesses in Africa, and he's working on the COVID vaccine and all this other good stuff. But that was the one guy that if you can consider Rockefeller a good guy, I think you can consider Bill Gates a good guy.
Right.
Putting aside his ruthless business tactics, at least.
Yep, they're very comparable. All right, they're actually very comparable.
I mean, Bill Gates has given away more money than he's worth right now.
Yes,
he's given away 50% of what he's been worth. Like he said he's paid more in property taxes than anyone else in the history of the planet.
Yeah,
like if he'd kept every dime, he'd be $200 billion.
Yeah,
like it's unbelievable how much he's worth.
Hasn't Bill Gates also agreed that like his trust when he dies is going to be given away to charity? Like his
90% of it is his kids are going to have to deal with 10% of $90 billion.
Right.
Yeah.
Did Bill and Melinda even have kids? I don't recall.
They have 2 kids.
Do they? Okay.
I believe they have 2 kids.
Created a Microsoft lab. Yeah.
You know who's really well off is Paul Allen. Well, he's dead now, but Paul Allen, he just refused to sell his shares. He stayed on the board, but he didn't really do anything with Microsoft since like the early 80s. Gates kept trying to buy him out, but he just held on to his shares very, very stubbornly and very, very wisely.
And KDL brings up a good point too, because we think of the tech field and the tech giants. We know them by names: Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates. We know the robber barons by their first name, but really the media corporations, the Disneys, the Viacoms, those we don't. They're as big, but they're faceless. So, I mean, I'm trying to think. Like, was there a faceless organization back then? There wasn't.
I'd say maybe the closest would be the Vanderbilts, only because it became more family run after Cornelius died. Went to the Bill or whatever they call him, Billy or whatever the oldest son was, and then from there, really kind of dispersed, and they really started focusing more on the university after the in the early 20th century.
But there's still the name.
Yeah, it's still the name.
It's still Vanderbilt. Right. Like there's no Mr. Viacom.
Right. Exactly. Sumner Redstone, maybe, but is he still?
I was thinking like Rupert. I mean, the only one I can think of right now is like Rupert Murdoch.
Rupert Murdoch, that'd be a good one. Yeah.
And then obviously, I mean, if Walt Disney was still alive, or if any of the Disneys were still running it, like obviously there's a name, but there's I don't even know. Michael Eisner, is he still running it? I don't even know.
I don't think so. I don't know.
Bob Iger was the last.
Oh, that's
right, Iger.
He just resigned, and I don't know.
Well, back then too, you had, if you want to talk about Disney for a second, you had, studio heads. They were the face of their studios. Samuel Goldwyn, MGM. I'm trying to think of them all now. Disney was one. My mind just went blank. Jack Warner for Warner Brothers, but they were nothing compared to the wealth of the robber barons or the tech giants today. Nothing. They just had a lot of influence, through film and media at the time.
Right.
But when you really did, and even Cornelius Vanderbilt, I read a biography on him not that long ago, like last year. I wasn't satisfied. It was good, but didn't go deep enough. But he was also one of those guys too that, like, I think he ditched his wife and
he did. He remarried. I don't know if she died or what the case, but I know he remarried.
Yeah. And then they pawned off their kids. The Rockefellers didn't. I think the Morgans didn't either, but the Vanderbilts definitely pawned off their kids to English royalty to buy themselves into, when all the gentry class was bankrupt at the turn of the last century too, they'd get engaged. Some lord would reach out his hand to a Vanderbilt daughter, and suddenly she's like Lady something, and that's how they also got global status and influence as well. But do we also want to measure then that that the Gilded Age from these elite robber barons and even the tiers beneath them, still millionaires at a time when it was absurd to be a millionaire. I mean, they really established and talk about the 1%. They were the less than 1%. They were the half of 1% in 1900, 1910.
I mean, it's the same amount of wealth now. It's just more spread. Oh, it's more wealth now, but there's definitely more spread out as far as your 1% is concerned. Like there's hundreds of billionaires on the planet right now. Hundreds in the country, as opposed to just, you have 5 robber barons or like a handful of robber barons. But it's still the same. I still think it's the same kind of business practices. But
so what do we? I guess we'll take it more general and then get a little more specific before we kind of talk, I think, a little bit in more detail about the actual specific tech giants today. Overall, positive or negative in the Gilded Age, in the Progressive Era, in terms of the monopolies that we just mentioned. What do you think? Overall, positive or negative for America? RA, what do you think?
For America as a whole, I'd say it was positive. Just because it was consolidated everything, like that was saying, everything was cheaper for the consumer. If it wasn't for them, you wouldn't have skyscrapers. You wouldn't have, that much of an advancement that quickly. But I'd say for America, good. For the common person, not that great.
I'd agree with RA. I think in the long run, it was good for America. They consolidated and made American infrastructure significantly more efficient. That allowed for the Industrial Revolution to boom and grow America to eventually have the industrial superpower that to fund World War II that boosted us through the rest of the 20th century, made us a superpower.
Ned?
I don't completely agree because I'm an anti-monopolist or a collusion. Like OPEC is a collusionary organization. So I'm against like price fixing or setting the prices. But there is a strong argument to be said that Carnegie Steel, which is now U.S. Steel, and Standard Oil and the subsequent companies after the breakup served a purpose at the time. So you needed a monopolization to I said it earlier, to bring order out of chaos. But when they weren't needed anymore, they were broken up. The trust busters broke them up. Was it 1911 when Standard Oil lost its in the Supreme Court, and Rockefeller was an old man. I think he lived to be almost 90, so he must have been in his 70s.
He lived playing 7.
Yeah, there you go. So he was about 77 at the time. He was playing golf in Ormond Beach, Florida, and they said, "You lost the case, Mr. Rockefeller." And he's like, "I'm going to be even richer." And it didn't matter. The breakup of Standard Oil, which was Mobil, Exxon, give me some others. They're all gas stations that are still around today. Yeah. When they broke up, it was better for the economy, capitalism, and even better for them, And those companies, that's what I kind of measured on. Morgan Stanley is still around. U.S. Steel is still around. All the Standard Oil is still around. It's just in Pennsylvania. But all the subsequent companies, they're all still viable companies today, 100 years later. It's amazing. So I think I think, yes, it was good for the company and it served its purpose. And then when it was done, it got broken up.
Right. Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that overall, Ned. It's just tough for me. So in terms of the progression and moving the country forward as a whole, definitely positive. The advancement in terms of the technological advancement wouldn't have happened nearly as quick without them. But you still look at the individual people's lives that are affected. So you're just talking about the 1870s, 1880s, you won't see real reform in those factories and manufacturing places until what, 1910 maybe.
Yep.
That's another 30, 40, even longer in terms of years. So it's tough to have, my dad could have been working in one of the shops making, a wage you'd think is criminal today. And then I could be doing the same thing. So it's tough to be in that position in the time and think it's a good thing or beneficial for the everyday average American. But, luckily for us, we're able to look back and say, yeah, it was probably overall positive. Didn't mean, it didn't hurt people at the time. Or at least that's kind of my take on it.
But you also had the Muckrakers too, like in the late 1890s and early aughts, right? And I can't think of the Etta Tarbell was the one that just came to my head when she wrote, was it, I think Standard Oil as like an octopus.
The History of Standard Oil, I think, was the book that is technically titled.
There you go. And it was, and Upton Sinclair was another one who did it on the meat packing industry in New York City.
Jungle?
Yeah, the Jungle, right?
Chicago.
Or Chicago, sorry.
The meat packing industry, yeah.
So once like you saw how the sausage is made literally in that case, but you did see like how it did hurt the poor people. Of course, it was also easy to hate the uber wealthy, and they get blamed for everything. So John D. Rockefeller Jr. was blamed for a Colorado mine explosion, which, because the Rockefeller family owned the mine, wasn't their fault directly, but he ended up going to court, going on trial because of a mine explosion that was, I think, naturally occurring gas. But okay, maybe the safety precautions weren't taken that they knew of at the time.
I don't think OSHA existed.
OSHA didn't exist. But you did have the Triangle Shirt Factory fire in New York in 1911. Yep. We had, you had young girls, women working in a factory in close conditions in a fire trap, jumping off, off on a 10-story building to avoid being burned to death. That gets horrible. It was a terrible tragedy, of course, but it also gets like a lot of publicity and put focus on working conditions of these people who you could say they were the victims of this type of robber baronry. But so there was some reform, and it does take a tragedy sometimes to bring to light and make the adjustments. Nobody really pays attention if your life is fine and not really affected through the mass consolidation of wealth and power. As long as you got you got your lights on, you got food in front of you, your kids are fed, you're going to be kind of okay until something like this happens where it says, whoa, people died because of mistakes being made by carelessness by these wealthy people who only care about their own, wealth and privilege. So it just took a while to catch up.
It takes some to shock the system.
Correct.
That's kind of a good last point, though. I mean, kind of if we transition into the tech giants, like what do you think it would take for things to change around here? Because like you said, my lights are on. It doesn't, like people freak out about like the Trump presidency and stuff. My life hasn't changed that much since he's been in office, from when Obama was in office, from when anyone else has been in office that I can really remember. So I'm just wondering what you guys think it'll take to control the tech giants, I guess, if you even think they need to be controlled. Austin, what do you got?
I definitely think they need to be controlled. I think they do a lot of things like behind the like Twitter and Amazon, and like TikTok is the other one. They're like mining all of your information and then selling it off to other companies to make a profit. Like, I think things like that, they need to be reined in. Like Twitter, I think, is blatantly biased towards the left. So I don't know what it's going to take to do that. I think only 10% of the population is on Twitter. So most people don't live on that, that hemisphere or whatever. But I don't know. I think it's chaos with the tech giants. I think it's not necessarily like they're a mass of wealth, but they control significant amount more influence than people think they do. But they hide it very well. So I don't know what it's going to take for people to realize that things need to change.
Well, I don't even know if they necessarily hide it well anymore. I think it's to a point where it's so overwhelmingly favored, leaning toward one side, that it's kind of in the open about it. And I think they're going as far as, up to saying, yeah, this is how it is. What are you going to do about it? Like, I almost feel like that's where we're at now. And if I could make a comparison to, back in the Gilded Age, kind of where we're at with the tech giants, I mean, I think we're still early on. I think we're still 1770s, 1780s. I don't see Teddy Roosevelt coming in and breaking up these tech giants anytime soon, personally.
Right.
I just think the pendulum needs to swing so far to the other side. And even if Trump gets reelected, he hasn't done anything about it in his first term. I don't know. He hasn't really shown much of an interest, aside from a few occasional tweets, in doing much about it, even if he gets elected again. So I don't see it changing anytime soon, whether it needs to change or not.
I don't think that the government will be able to regulate what they don't understand.
Right.
And I think the way technology is going, they will always be 10 steps ahead of whatever the people sitting on the congressional committee is asking them. If you watch Mark Zuckerberg up there, like, he looks like a robot, but the questions that are being asked are like comical. Like,
it's comical for us looking at it. Like, as a viewer, we're like, Jesus Christ, really? Like, we know, like, we're laughing at these, like,
we can answer those questions.
There's that famous clip where one of the senators asks him, like, how do you make money? And he's like, what the fuck?
Yeah, it's like you have like the most powerful man on the internet in front of you, and you're like, so how do you make money? Or like there's a meme of like it's obviously big, but it's Ted Cruz asking Mark Zuckerberg, like, let's say you could go back to like 1967, and like was there an algorithm in place to find out if someone has like an interest in coded messages in San Francisco, like a reference to the Zodiac killer, but it's not that far off. Like it's set, and I just don't think you can have a bunch of like 60 and 70-year-old men and women trying to make light of like Facebook's algorithm and how they mine data. Like I just don't see it. So I'm with KDL as we're way far back until you get someone in there who actually knows what they're talking about.
Well, I'm old enough to be all of your fathers, so I can clearly remember the time when the idea of what tech knows about you, KDL, and you, Austin, and you, R8, now would make my grandparents vomit, because that would be such an infringement on your individual liberties that are guaranteed by the Constitution. The idea that you're being tracked in any way is appalling. It's time was okay. I'm going to give you criminal behavior here, but you can get a speeding ticket in Georgia and never pay it, and they would never catch you unless you went back through Georgia, right? Yeah. Now I'm getting like toll charges for because I went through a toll and without an easy pass on a rent-a-car, and I'm getting like, how okay, I can see how they do it, but I think your generation is going to have a very difficult time because I'll be dead. I don't care, but you guys are going to have a very difficult time knowing that you are being monitored, whether you will it or you don't. If it's you don't want it, as long as you have this, they're tracking you. Yeah. And Elon Musk said that too. Oh, what if we turn it off? No, they're still tracking you, and it's only going to get worse. And it's going to be commercialized, as we talked about, for your buying practices and tendencies, and it's going to be drilling down into your conversations, intimate conversations you're having with your wife or someone. Well, what do you think? Financial discussions
or Google Home.
Correct.
Like you really think that they're just like, oh, we only turn it on when you ask us to. It's like, okay, but how do you know that we're asking you to do it?
Yeah.
Without listening in. You have to be listening for the words.
So, and the other thing too is, and while that is inherently, to me, it's inherently evil. I can see how it would be foolish for the government to even try to regulate that, because then you're infringing on the company's ability to do business, which is also guaranteed, right? I mean, you can, as long as it's not harmful.
Right. So I was assuming you have to prove more, the company or the person. Like who's
that's a good question. More? Well, is it harmful? I think if it comes down to doing harm, is the gathering of information and through technological means harmful?
So I guess like maybe the only time to try to go in the services that they're providing benefiting us. No, they're no longer using it to help us, live an easier life, and it's only helping them. But I don't see, from a business strategy, that doesn't make sense for them to ever switch. Like they'll always be trying to do things to help the consumer who they're taking advantage of.
Look at any 7-year-old kid, and you guys are gonna have kids someday. Watch how they just like stare at their iPads, their phones. It's like, I wouldn't even give my kid one, But it's keeping up with the Joneses. Yeah. I mean, TV was bad enough, right? The television, you guys probably like me grew up like in front of the TV. That was bad enough. Even looking back now, you probably wonder like, God damn, I spent a lot of time watching shit. But now it's the world, the entirety of mankind's knowledge is on a goddamn
at your fingertips
6x3 thing. I mean, it's you guys. It's going to be very. I think it's only going to get worse, to be honest. What you mean what we talked about, the tech power grab? They're only going to take more and more and more.
Yeah, I think.
And with that,
well, I'm gonna real quick. I think something that's interesting in this case that you didn't necessarily get in the with the other monopolies we talked about is that there's a First Amendment issue here also, and you can kind of get into like worker safety and you have some constitutional issues there as well. But this is pretty clearly that I think the only way you're going to break it up is it's not going to be okay. Now Twitter is going to become, like Parler and those other apps. Now you have to become smaller. I think it's going to be okay if you're going to be this big and this is like you're going to be used for discussion, open forum conversation, that sort of thing. Is it has to be treated like a town square. It has to be treated like it's your First Amendment right to be able to say what you want. Again, as long as it's not directing harm at other people. I know that's not a new argument by any stretch, but I think in terms of strictly getting rid of or dissolving them, breaking them up, I think that's the way it's going to have to go about, especially with the social media companies. I think it's going to have to be, you are now considered to be a free speech, First Amendment type platform.
Correct. Nationalized. Spoken like a socialist, KDL. Oh my God!
And then you're going to do
what
a whole
are you teaching these children?
Yep, that's right.
No, but I do agree though. You're right. It almost becomes like a public utility, like your gas company, your oil company, your electric company. If it serves a need. Although this,
like the post office.
Oh, gee. There's a bag over the one here in downtown Ocean Park.
Oh, is there?
No, I'm kidding.
Is it on fire?
No, I'm kidding. And maybe on another show, somebody can explain it to me because that just came out of the blue. Like, why are they covering post office boxes, or are they, or is it?
You'll have to go on with you'll have to go on with the Channel Zero guys to have that conversation.
There you go.
So it's a hot button topic right now.
That's one. Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
That was good.
I think that'll do it for the Robber Baron episode of the History Buffs presented by RA's Drywall. For that. So if any people drywall out there, let us know.
Right.
Ship me some drywall.
And Austin has an au pair service, so that he wants to speak about. Call 1-800-AUSTIN au pair. Yeah.
Right. So with that, I think we'll wrap up this episode. Again, look out for another episode later in the week. Should be dropping. Hopefully, I think we're planning on Thursday, but it'll definitely be up at some point later this week. So with that, RA, Austin, Ned, thanks. And this is the History Buffs signing off.
Until next time.